Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is going to be a focus on Pakistan's foreign policy situations, strategies and priorities, especially with regards to how the newly elected government within this year is now approaching different countries and making visits to important countries and improving our historical relations with them, including, of course, the Prime Minister's upcoming visit to China. And this comes as the first visit by the Prime Minister since assuming office earlier this year, which was previously also something that was done by the foreign minister of the country, in which he attended important summits and discussed important agendas, including trade and investment. And this is, of course, something that is high on the agenda this time around as well, with the Prime Minister, of course, speaking about the phase 2 of the very important CPEC project, and, of course, also taking forward this relationship in other dynamics as well. What exactly will be, of course, part of the discussions remains to be seen. But what we're going to be observing in our show today and trying to understand is the developing dynamics with China, particularly in terms of the current political and economic times, and then, of course, with regards to CPEC, and also in terms of Pakistan's relations with other countries, including that of the United States, the kind of course, impact that this may have. Although, of course, officials, including Ambassador Masood Khan, has spoken about this particular issue, saying that the relationship with China is not at the expense of the relationship with the US, but whether or not the US actually also looks at the situation in a similar way is something we'll try to deliberate upon today and understand what is going on, particularly in terms of Pakistan's increasing collaboration with the US and, of course, our developing relationship as a strong ally for the US in terms of course, anti-terror activities and efforts against the war on terror, something Pakistan unfortunately is still dealing with, and this is, of course, something that also impacts us from Afghanistan. So we're going to try and understand the current dynamics that the country is in and how our foreign policy is evolving and what sort of priorities and measures need to take shape and, of course, need to be considered when we talk about this issue. Our next segment is going to focus on another very important topic that, of course, has developed earlier today as well, and that's, of course, the situation in Gaza, which has taken another important turn with the ICJ ordering a halt immediately in terms of the fighting in Rafah, the southern city of Gaza, which, of course, unfortunately, earlier this month was attacked by Israeli forces as well, which was perhaps the only safe place for many Palestinians that had taken refuge in this particular city, and the only place also where humanitarian aid could also have reached the people of Palestine. But unfortunately, since the fighting has begun, that has stopped, and because of that, of course, there is a very dangerous situation for the people there, especially in terms of food shortages. So we're going to be taking a look at what this important development means in the International Court of Justice and how, of course, this particular order will be dealt with, because it seems of course, considering previous orders as well by the same court, that there hasn't been a real change on the situation on the ground. And there is, of course, the aspect of how, even though it may be something that is legally binding, there is no way to actually enforce it. And the court, of course, does not have its own police to enforce this decision. And so we're going to be taking a look at what this means in terms of Israel's response that have called for an emergency meeting as well, which means that this particular decision, of course, is important, but how much of an impact it will have on the situation on ground and, of course, on the suffering of the people of Palestine still remains to be seen, and especially in light of what the ICC has also called for in terms of asking for the arrest warrants of Benjamin Netanyahu, among others. So we're going to be taking a look at this in terms of the developing situation and how important it is to the current scenario, and that's going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Faisal, and we've also been joined online by former Ambassador Dr. Jamil Ahmed. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil, for being part of the discussion and joining us in the debate today. And I'll start with you, first of all, in terms of Pakistan's foreign policy situation. And I understand, of course, Pakistan's foreign policy priorities and, of course, our relationships with countries like China have stayed more or less the same, of course, in terms of the kind of friendship and historical ties that we enjoy. And then, of course, a strong trade and investment relationship we have and how both countries have been there for each other in times of need. But especially in terms of the current political and economic scenario in Pakistan and with the newly formed government agreement in place, and of course CPEC now taking moving forward in terms of phase 2 of the project. How exactly do you see the upcoming visit of the Prime Minister, his maiden visit since taking office this year, to China? And then, of course, in terms of the developing trade and investment relationship that we have from China, and what can be expected in the long run under CPEC in particular, but also in general?
But basically, CPEC is one of those projects which is obviously very significant for Pakistan, not only for Pakistan, but if we look at CPEC, as a flagship project of the BRI, then we understand the whole the project, the whole project of about $4 trillion, of which almost about $1 trillion China has already spent. So it's a very ambitious plan, and that plan, which has already started being seen about its infrastructure and about some of the early harvesting of the project. Coming back on Pakistan's policy is very straightforward, but then that straightforward policy, to what extent we could steer through um, uh, the geopolitical the geopolitical competition and the competition between China and the United States, because we are located geographically in a zone where both these countries and both these blocs are uh, quite well interested. Um, the American interest in this region has always been very prime, but now, ever since China has started attaining its economic achievements at a very high pedestal and a very high trajectory of economic gains, which has started translating into its advantage in the geopolitical side as well. So that is where the competition also starts increasing. So that's one aspect, and having that consideration in our mind, Pakistan so far is steering through by balancing it and by having its bilateral relation under those norms of the international laws, that we can have bilateral relations not at the expense and not at at the cost of any other country. And all countries have their own sovereign right to establish their contract with the other member states of the United Nations. So that's what China. And with China, Pakistan has such a deep-rooted relations, and China has always stood by Pakistan in all kind of, as we say, all-weather friend, and rightly so. Whether it's a multilateral forum for us, or whether it's the on the economic side, or it's on the military collaboration and cooperation side, China has always stood by Pakistan. So we always say that it's a time-tested friend, and therefore we definitely like to build on the higher trajectory of our relations with China. At the same time, our relations sometimes have been like a roller coaster with the United States, but the United States have been our very old friend, and United States even today is the topmost country where we have our the positive trade balance, our export destination, and the investors from United States still, they are, after China, they are number two now. Previously they were number one. Besides that, the United States, we really cannot ignore that so far as our foreign policy is concerned, because the United States has its own significance and importance. Also, we have always been maintaining some kind or the other, some type or the other relations with the United States. And there have been times that we've been hands in glove, and we've been together, we've been really struggling against the war against terrorism, number one. Although during that time, due to variety of reasons, we did not really gain as much as we wanted to, and we did not really reap the fruits of that war against terrorism. Rather, it started having some fallout, but that becomes a different subject. Right now, if we just talk about the Prime Minister's visit to China, forthcoming visit, perhaps the 4th to 7th of June, the official announcement would be made very soon, but it's almost settled. And during that, it is going to be follow up in a way that there has been meetings of the deputy prime minister and the foreign minister. Very recently, he attended the foreign ministers' meeting, Mr. Sogdar, and during those meetings, they did discuss about the CPEC second phase. Now, second phase is the actual phase in which the nine economic, special economic zone, they are to be activated, out of which Dabeji is almost 20% complete. The Bolan the economic special zone is also progressing quite well. So those economic zone plus the meeting which we had, the JCC meeting today, that also covers wider spectrum of the 13 JCC Joint Cooperation Committee, wider spectrum of the points and the projects which is to be covered in phase two, and that covers communication and security is obviously our priority to provide all the security protection to the Chinese companies and the personnel, and that is also a concern of China. Then the infrastructure and energy, agriculture, agreement on mineral and the mineral corridor, which they have planned to really build, and then timeline to launch ML1. So that was also one of those points which were discussed previously, and also those were touched upon. But more importantly, this time, the PSDP plans and also provincial development plans are being aligned with the CPEC projects and plans. So that is something which one must say that a very wise step, and then that is going to uh, actually augment all the projects which is associated with the CPEC. That's
Right.
going to augment its benefit to the people of Pakistan. But this alignment of the projects, all the projects, including the link roads of the provincial government and link roads to the CPEC infrastructure, so that once aligned, even the donor funding
Right.
projects, though they once they are aligned, they are going to really yield the proper results.
Absolutely. And I understand that. That's, of course, extremely important. Faisal, I also want to understand, of course, the dynamics that we've enjoyed with China date back very long ago. And, of course, in terms of how we have evolved this relationship further in difficult times is also important. And CPEC is, again, a very important project as well. But in terms of how we see our relationship today and how it's developing, I want your perspective on how perhaps when we were looking at, particularly in terms of CPEC, the phase one and the kind of difficulties or hindrances that came in the way and how things were evolved and how things proceeded further to where we stand today, especially in terms of security situation, the economic situation, the political situation in the country, and entering into phase two of CPEC, particularly if we look at this project in focus and how, of course, it is a major part of our dynamic with China. I want your take on how fundamentally separate or different do you think the current dynamics are, or the two phases are of this project in terms of what we're dealing with today?
Yes, and obviously, when we talk about Pakistan's relations, the most current relations with China, of course, we're talking about CPEC, and CPEC is not only important for Pakistan, but of course, it is part and parcel, and the most important part and parcel of Belt and Road Initiative, which is being initiated by the Chinese themselves, and of course, they always wanted this connectivity to the Arabian Ocean from Pakistan, and that is being provided, and I think it's a win-win situation for Pakistan and China at the same time. But when we talk about, of course, the first phase, we know that $25 billion they have been spent, and more is coming, And in the first one, of course, we saw the projects were related to infrastructure. Pakistan's infrastructure has improved. China has extensively, of course, funded Pakistan's infrastructures. And then energy crisis, which was being faced by Pakistan, China has extensively, of course, invested in that as well. But when we talk about the next phase, the phase which we are going to go through very soon, and that phase is related to, of course, the investments in the sector of IT. There would be IT cooperations, then there would be research and development cooperations between both of the countries, which was expected previously, and it is now going to take place now. And then there are furthermore infrastructure projects that has of course that would be extra empowering the CPEC further. And then of course we know that special economic zones are being created, and them zones would be pivotal for CPEC itself, and not only for China but of course for Pakistan as well. There would be jobs created in Pakistan or for Pakistanis, and then special economic zones would be an opportunity for the industrialists and the business people to of course invest in them, and of course enhance our exports to the world, and different sectors would be improving themselves in coming future. When we talk about all of these CPEC related relations, then we of course need to go back to Pakistan's relations with by the way, first I want to highlight the hindrances you talked about, and yes, security is a hindrance. And when we talk about the other hindrances, of course we saw that the projects were stopped during the COVID as well, because it was not only Pakistan or China which were hit, but of course the whole world, it faced that problem during that time. And then we can say that COVID had a lot to do with the slowness of CPEC in Pakistan. And at the same time, security related threats are always there. We know the Chinese are Chinese citizens, Chinese engineers, Chinese teachers. They have been facing attacks on them, and of course we should be extra cautious about these attacks. And these attacks are not coming from merely just the terrorists, but of course somebody behind the curtains is investing and facilitating them terrorist groups to of course carry out these kind of activities, because nobody likes to see CPAC persisting and of course a success. Reason being, this would give extra edge to China, and of course China would be reducing its times of exports, nearly 7 to 10 days of the difference between both of the sides. I mean, if they come all the way from Malacca and cover all of the East China Sea and South China Sea, and here they only have to cross through Pakistan and get into Arabian Ocean and go along their own routes. And to me, I think this is a win-win situation for both. And yes, there are hindrances, but them hindrances can be addressed too, and they are being addressed. Pakistan has extensively worked on it. Pakistan security agencies, intelligence agencies, with the help of course and better coordination with the Chinese, of course they are making sure that every day this noose on the terrorist is tightened and tightened, and of course their plans are not being successful, and that is taking place 24/7. Yes, there are few incidents that do take place. There are incidents that go simply slip through the intelligence and the security forces, and that's why it takes place. But at the same time, we should be proud of our security services and intelligence services, that they are working day and night to make it sure that all of the Chinese are safe in Pakistan, and CPEC is a success. Now, talking about the history of the relations, of course, when we talk about Pakistan and China's relations, they date back to 1947-48, and we shouldn't be forgetting that Pakistan was the first country to welcome China on the map, and then Pakistan was the very first country whose PIA landed into China, the very first airline of the world that actually landed into China, and China of course celebrates that fact as well. And when we talk about, there are certain parts of the world that have, sort of reservations of on Pakistan's being multilateral in the spectrum of having relations with the other countries. Yes, of course, we know that US has reservations on this,
Right.
but Sana, we shouldn't be forgetting that Pakistan is the very country that actually sort of brought both of the countries on the negotiation table back in early 70s. Early 70s, Pakistan was the country that actually brought both of the countries on the table of negotiations, and
Sure.
Pakistan always played a buffer zone between both of them, and Pakistan has time and again highlighted that friendship with both of the countries is as pivotal as it should be. And
Absolutely,
that
and I
can never
understand
be,
Pakistan's
negotiated.
perspective on that. Of course, this is something that Pakistan has always made clear, and even now. But Farrukh, I also want to understand, of course, how the US actually perceives this equation as well,
Thank you.
because that's important, especially in terms of how then, of course, our own foreign policy measures will change accordingly.
Right. Thank you, Sana. This is a very, very important question. But I wanted to, because Faisal was talking about, Pakistan bringing both China and US together. It reminded me of a very interesting story. I'm not going to go into detail, but when Henry Kissinger came to Pakistan and he had to be actually shipped to China, at that time we placed a decoy man pretending as Henry Kissinger, and then this guy actually was smuggled into China, and then negotiations started. This guy who was there was pretending that he has loose stomach or some kind of illness. But having said that, I'm so glad that you asked this question, because as everybody would know, the trigger for this discussion actually comes from the interview or the statement actually given by Pakistan's ambassador to the US, Masood Khan.
Yeah.
And it actually, kind of tries to thumb at one of our kryptonites. And Hina Rabbani Khan, no one less has actually in the past, when she was Junior Minister of Foreign Affairs, she actually gave an interview and confessed this much, that this demand from both sides or various sides to actually pick a side between China and America absolutely kills us, right? Because Pakistan owes a lot to China, Pakistan owes a lot to the US, and both these countries owe a lot to Pakistan as well. It actually reminded me of an anecdote from my own childhood. And I mean, I'm not attaching any emotional value to this, but when we were little, parents, being South Asian parents, would have an argument, and then they asked the children which one is their favorite parent, right? So my sister would immediately sit with father and say, "You are my favorite parent." My brother would actually go straight to mother and say, "You are my favorite parent." So I used to sit in the middle and say, "I can't live without both of you." That would mean that I was the least favorite child of them all.
And you were a diplomatic man.
No, not really. I'm conscientious, so what I'm telling you, I meant it, right? But I was the least favorite child, but at least they stayed together till the time my father was alive. So Pakistan actually does not subscribe to this idea of an unfolding Cold War. And there's a reason why. Sana, Pakistan has gone through a lot of pains, a lot of crises because of the circumstances, things that keep on changing. And by the way, when any the respected participant actually talks about, the Straits of Malacca or this string of pearls and all that, I mean, I have to actually try to wake myself up, whether I'm in the 20th century or 21st, right? Elon Musk's SpaceX actually came up with this amazing idea that in the past, whenever you would go for space travel or some kind of exploration, the rockets would leave and then they would crash back, right? He actually came up with the modules that actually take you to the space and then come back and land. What is going to happen? Because this technology is going to be scaled. Or space trade is going to become very easy very soon. If that happens, all this idea of a two-dimensional map is gone. Regarding the overall situation, while there are forces, and I understand when Narendra Modi came to power, the first thing they tried to do was to use their lever to ensure that their foreign policy, that there is this Cold War that starts between China and the US, because that way it gets the benefits from both worlds. Ours is a dilemma quite opposite. But again, are there no common enemies for all humanity? Faisal just mentioned COVID. One invisible virus shut down the entire civilization.
Yeah.
Climate change is taking place and we are sitting on a boiling rock, right? And it is going to make life hell for all of us. Grinding poverty, healthcare I have already mentioned, tech displacement because of automation and AI. Because of all those things, these ideas that somehow these countries are bound to fight, a stupid one. And anybody who has this vested interest should actually wake up and smell some coffee, because this time, if we don't actually work together, we are all doomed.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
the humble summation is that Pakistan's way is the best way. Work with both and convince them that you don't have to go to fight.
True.
Absolutely. And Dr. Jamil, I'd like your perspective quickly on this as well before we move on to the next segment. And I request you to stay for that as well with the issue of Palestine, a very important discussion as well. But before that, also your perspective on the US dynamic and how precarious the situation is for Pakistan. And of course, we understand what needs to be done and how this is something that will impact all our dynamics in the future as well. But I want to know, in terms of actually striking that balance and making sure that we are really not brushing against anyone, what exactly do you think Pakistan will have to be mindful of?
No, basically, we have to really keep engaging with both the countries, and that's what we are doing, as a matter of fact. And once we keep engaging, the skepticism of both the countries can be addressed. And that's what basically is happening these days. We must understand that the world is definitely drifting. Space trade, it is just mentioned, and space weaponization, that's another thing. Which brings me to the same point of competition. That is, the United States is quite concerned about the Russia and China space weaponization. Anyone who has the superiority or the supremacy in space would definitely is going to call the shot in the near future. Coming back about the BRI and CPAC, yes, CPAC is a lifeline to China. CPAC is very close to our heart. Why it's lifeline? At the moment, it's 4 to 6 weeks. It takes 16,000 nautical miles traversing from the Gulf states and the Gulf waters to China, to Chinese ports from Beijing and onward. So, and then that is reduced to only 5,000 road mileage, which is a huge advantage. And the future planning of the oil pipeline and the other stuff on these lines, it reduces the vulnerability of China, the strategic vulnerability. China imports about 80%, and China's goods and services, 80% of which is exposed. And we must also remember remember that very recently the AUKUS, which is a defense accord, the Quads, the AUKUS, and the kind of the grouping from both sides. We just heard about the Spring of Alliance and the Spring of Pearl. So we are into that situation where so far we've been able to steer through any kind of a skepticism which could be that serious that we are not handling. We would not be handled. So far, it's fine. But now, subsequently, at future stages, we would be very cautious. As a matter of fact, we have to be a member of SCO. We are already a member of ECO. We have to reap the fruits of these this part of the world and this block of the world. At the same time, we cannot lose sight of our interest with the United States and its allies. So therefore, it's difficult, but so far we are sailing through
Right.
this difficult tides, and hopefully
Absolutely.
that should continue. China is $17 trillion economy, and then China is the number one manufacturing country since 2010. China is number one trading country since 2013. China has really brought revolution through the BRI, and that is and further augmented the way China is progressing towards the military progress, towards the military strength, towards the space, as I said, Russia and China. So that is creating a little heat between the two very important parts of the world. And that is where Pakistan automatically becomes more sensitive, and Pakistan foreign policy becomes more sensitive. And then we have to have the sensitivity of these powerful countries. And we are just located in that geographical the situation where we are trying to balance it. And so far, we are almost quite successful. And Prime Minister's this
Right.
Chinese visit is further going to augment what we are discussing that here.
Absolutely. Moving on to our next topic, Ambassador Jamil, is of course really, really important to the developing situation in Gaza, and of course the ICJ's orders of halting fighting in Rafah is extremely important to the current situation and the misery of the people of Palestine. But of course we've seen previous orders as well, and I understand how this is a bit different from them, of course, in terms of actually asking for a halt in fighting and an emergency order in place as well. But again, at the same time, while we talk about how it's legally binding, we also know there's no real mechanism of enforcing it and making sure that it actually does happen. In light of this and what the ICC, of course, has also asked for in terms of the arrest warrants of Benjamin Netanyahu, among others, what do you think is the likely impact of this order on the situation in Rafah, and what would be the response of Israel? We know that they've called a meeting of sorts, but what exactly will be the change, if any, on ground?
This is a tough week for Israel, so far as the moral pressure is concerned, so far as the legal pressure is concerned. In fact, three European countries have already announced the recognition of Palestine. The ICG, the International Criminal Court, the Chief Prosecutor General has already applied for the arrest warrant of Netanyahu, Defense Minister, and some of the Hamas leaders. Very recently, there were voting in the General Assembly, and 143 member states had voted in favor of the Palestine and its membership. So there's a lot of pressure on it. But then, can that pressure boil down to the fact that Israel start acceding to such judgments of the court? My own understanding and my own analysis is that Israel has flouted with so many Security Council resolutions, and Israel finance minister and the war cabinet still is in progress. They are having their meeting, but there is one announcement that they are not going to implement that ICC judgment, what they have asked to stop or to open Rafah access for the aid, and also to stop the attacks on Rafah. Although the request of the South African application was, the South Africans were, that there should be a total withdrawal. So the court has not given any judgment, but South Africa is by far quite satisfied with the court judgment. Now, the bigger question is, what are the implementing tools with the International Criminal Court? So there's no implementing tool. This time they have asked for the investigation into the genocide, and they have applied the Genocide Convention this time. Israel has vehemently, Israel is one of the signatories, by the way, of Genocide Convention, but Israel has totally refused that they are not going. Let's see whether the investigators, and most probably it's going to be the Human Rights Commission and then the Inquiry Commission of the Human Rights, perhaps they might as well apply for the access to the Rafah for
Right.
investigation. The
But
court is of the view.
Ambassador Saab, I want to understand whether or not that will actually happen, because of course we've seen United Nations observers also denied this access previously, and then I also want to understand that when we talk about how this is something that is being taken seriously by perhaps the International Court of Justice. At the same time, we've also seen that if there is no real way to ensure implementation, I want to understand then the value that this court order has in light of what's going on. I understand there is an investigation that might happen there. I understand that there is a month's time given to Israel to actually come back with a report on this, but there is no real consequence of not doing that. So if Israel doesn't do that, doesn't comply, for example, then okay, what will happen?
Under the international law, which is the charter, which is the United Nations Charter, the Security Council can pass a resolution, which in this case would be vetoed, and that resolution is binding. But as I was mentioning, that Israel has flouted more than 6 resolutions in past, very serious resolutions. So they can always, so long as they know that the United States is going to veto. The Security Council also, any member in the Security Council can present a resolution asking for the delay in the implementation of either the arrest warrant in particular, or even this is, although it's mandatory judgment and it has to be under the international law implemented, but the only way that it can be implemented is through the Security Council resolution, Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Chapter 6 is the sanction, and sanction on those states, the member states of the United Nations, which do not comply with the. Now, National Court is one of the organs of the United Nations and endorsed by 143 or even more countries, ICC rather, more countries, and and then they are quite independent. The prosecute. I was just speaking about 2 hours ago from with the ex-prosecutor general of the ICC, International Criminal Court, whose name is Mr. Mohammed Othman, who was my colleague in the United Nations. And he was also describing that it's mandatory, but the implementing tools are not available. The prosecutor is quite independent. The judges are quite independent. The court is quite independent. They work independently. And then they have their own jurisdictions. We recently saw that the prosecutor general has applied for the arrest warrant of Netanyahu, the defense minister, and others. But the formulation of 3 judges panel for the pre-trial has yet not been designated, because we know behind the scene how much pressure is going on. Although the court has gone really straight and they have gone by the book, and
right,
they have tried to, yeah.
Absolutely. I understand that perspective. Thank you very much, Ambassador Jamil. Unfortunately, we're getting out of time, but thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the discussion as well. Faisal, I want your perspective also in terms of what this court order means to you. While, of course, we understand the nuances of how disappointing, again, this development can be in terms of no real value to the people of Palestine, there are many who argue that there is value in terms of the kind of measures such as these that we have seen over the past few months, and how perhaps the space for Israel is narrowing. Do you agree with that?
Sana, obviously, when we talk about whatever's going on in Gaza, it is, of course, saddening to see that nobody is paying any heed to the brutal treatment which Gazans are, facing at the hands of rogue Israelis. And when I say rogue Israelis, I don't mean like Netanyahu says that it's the only Jewish state in the world. It's not Jewish state at all. Jews are the ones who are actually, protesting against whatever's going on, with shoulder to shoulder with the Gazans, shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinians. They are protesting against it. It's the Zionist design which is actually, brutalizing humanity. And that is why we saw that this, verdict came out today. And to me, I know that it cannot be implemented, it cannot be enforced, because it can only be enforced through Security Council. But at the same time, it has the isolation factor, the political isolation, which Israel would be facing. It is going to face, and we have already seen that the major countries from the Western world, they have started getting up and of course condemn whatever is going on in Gaza, because it's not about the territorial claims which Israel keeps on making. I mean, Israel, all of these Zionists, they entered in Palestine as immigrants, and now when with the help of their guns, with the help of their money and extensive money, and with the help of their medias, they have almost captured whole Palestine and converted it into Israel, their Israel and Zionist Israel. And to me, I think there will be pressure. The isolation is the factor. Now it is entirely up to the world, or up to the allies, the very worthy allies of Netanyahu's design. They need to sit with Netanyahu and they need to stop this madness. If of course Security Council is not going to enforce it, and if United Nations, of course United Nations can only send peace troops there once Security Council would allow it. But if that can't be done, then I think sanity must prevail. And there are countries who are still standing with this madness coming from Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is being considered, I'm not saying it, but being considered as a devil who's dressed up as a human, and he must be stopped, and that can only be stopped by his allies, and his ally should be sane enough to actually stop him.
Right. Farrukh, I also want your perspective on how do you see the situation and whether or not you think that this development will change anything.
Right. Forgive my cynic tone, Sana. I was reading a quote. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for the good ones, good men, to do nothing. Now, doing and saying something are different things, right? Right now, what has happened? It reminds me of LOTR, Lord of the Rings. The Council of Three Beards actually consulting, and after days deciding that yes, the person who is petitioning them is a hobbit. Right now, I don't think that whatever the ICJ has done will have any impact on the ground. Of course, it is helping them cover own weaknesses, because had this verdict not been given, there would have been creation of some kind of precedent, so to speak. So they have done their beautiful paperwork, but does it change anything? We know that had the shoe been on the other foot, if an Arab country was doing this to Israel, what would have happened? Within no time, I mean, the entire world machinery would have actually stepped in. Remember what happened to Iraq when it invaded Kuwait? So, with that kind of double standards, I think that international order that we used to believe in is just telling us that it is incapable of doing much. You just pointed out that whatever action takes place, in the end is going to go to the Security Council, and it is going to go and die there. So, what am I going to celebrate today? The fact that this judgment is going to bring back 25, 26, 28,000 people from the dead, or people who have actually lost their limbs or their livelihoods, they are going to get everything back. No, that is not going to happen. So, I hope for one day to see some kind of good men and women to actually stand up and be in the policy positions to ensure that some good is done. But that moment is not now.
I understand that, and of course that is unfortunately true, but we of course have the hope, and we hope that that actually does happen eventually, and the people that are suffering at the moment, their suffering comes to an end, and Pakistan continues to, of course, stand with them in this time of need, and perhaps that will eventually help when people all over the world stand by them. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us and being part of the discussion. That's all that we have from the debate today. We'll now see you Monday.